Greetings, friends. You are on the Military Reports channel. And today we will discuss with you the situation in Ukraine on the 13th of April, 2024 year. A lot of things have happened today, so let's get started. Let's start with you with fun, with good news. If you remember. As good, probably most likely joyful, cheerful, uplifting, perhaps even to such an extent. Remember just yesterday, we discussed the video with you how the first Ukrainian, at least the facts are recorded in the video, managed to cross the river on the border with Romania and Moldova, thereby saving his life, escaping from mobilization. It was a complicated process. The river had a sufficient current, fast enough, it was carried away strongly for some time. And there was probably a risk in general that this whole story would end quite tragically, but on the whole, the young man was able to overcome this milestone and thereby save his life. So today, separate information is already being received. Separate sources are even publishing some kind of queries in a Google search engine. And as you can see, the largest number of queries that are now interested in perhaps a certain circle of people in Ukraine is how to swim across the Tisha River. In other words, this request is currently the most popular. As we discussed with you, most likely in the near future, there will be repeated attempts to cross this river, most likely in this place. And most likely the armed forces of Ukraine will even have to transfer up to one brigade to this direction, in order to contain the breakthrough of the front or the border from Ukraine towards Romania. Next, let's go with you to the line of combat contact. We will start with you from the Zaporozhye direction. To be more precise, this is currently the Kherson direction. One big front is considered. And today, the armed forces of Ukraine in general, Russian sources report attacks on Tokmak with the use of cluster shells. However, today Ukrainians are hitting not only Tomak, today's strikes were also inflicted on Zaporozhye, on the Zaporozhye station. The nuclear power plant were hit today with high tops, and in the area of the settlement of Vasilevka in the forest. They found a hidden artillery installation, which was immediately hit by HIMARS. A separate detachment, let's say, of the Ronin of the 65th Mechanized Brigade today, or the gunners struck at hidden equipment in the area of Cheradovova. That is, a fairly dense fire firm C does not lead the APU in this direction. First of all, of course, this is due to the possible concentration of the forces of the Russian army in this direction. Let me remind you that some sources report that the Russian Federation plans to conduct not just an offensive operation in the near future in the summer, but an offensive operation in 4 directions, including the Zaporozhye direction, will be one of the key directions of the upcoming summer large offensive of the Russian army. Then we are moving with you to the Navromevsky tactical bridgehead. Interesting news is also coming here today. Let me remind you that the last few days, fighting has been underway on the southern outskirts of the harvest. Russian troops are trying to gain a foothold in the farms in the southern part, gradually systematically transferring this reinforcement. In order to stabilize the front line and, let's say, in order to prevent this stabilization, Russian troops are striking bridges, infrastructure, logistics, APU in the area of Velikaya Novoselovka. In these frames, we can see in another strike with the use of artillery. The bridge was damaged and probably for several weeks, possibly for several days. And the armed forces of Ukraine are unlikely to be able to use this transport artery to supply troops to the south of Velikaya Novoselovka. Of course, this is not the only route, not the only opportunity to transfer forces, but in any case, logistics has been disrupted to some extent. Then we are moving with you to the Ugledar direction. Over the past day, a large number of frames have been published, a large number of attacks by the UF with buckets, and on the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. That is, a systematic sweep of the settlement continues to be carried out for the same repeaters, for antennas, radars. All this is being destroyed. In other words, preparatory actions are underway for possible offensive operations. Of the interesting things, it is worth paying attention to these frames. In these frames, we can observe with you the flight of a Russian drone, an attack drone, in April 2024. That is, the other day. We see with you how behind the landfill, behind the dump, it is located, even with the naked eye. You can see a combat vehicle, the infantry of the armed forces of Ukraine, which from a long distance is trying to strike the positions of the Russian army south of this mine, and in general, of course. It is worth noting that these strikes, of course, were not inflicted on the settlement of Nikolskoye, so as the distance is quite large. It's about 4 kilometers, the second ones don't beat like that. In general, it can be assumed that there may have been some kind of advance of the Russian army from Nikolskoye to the north in the last day, and precisely to the distance at which the BMP-2 can work on advanced Russian positions. In other words, something has stirred here, so far only indirect signs, indirect confirmation. We will wait for more details. Then we are moving with you to Novomykhailovka, Konstantinovka. 2 interesting news came from Novomykhailovka today. The first one was published by the neutral cartographer Syria, which says that the situation as a whole for the armed forces of Ukraine is developing as negatively as possible here and in general. He confirmed, or rather, let's say, put forward such a hypothesis, put forward such an opinion, that the armed forces of Ukraine finally left Novomykhailovka under pressure from the armed forces of the Russian Federation, in the direction of populated Point Paraskovevka. We have not received any video evidence, and therefore cannot confirm this. A little later, other pro-Russian sources report that this is how we will read this post, like Novomykhailovka everything. But wait for official messages. It's just a text message. In other words, there is an extremely high probability, and it has already been received from 2 sources of information, as you can see, that the western part of Novaya Mikhailovka has fallen, the Russian army has already come close to Paraskovevka, and the focus is gradually shifting to the settlement of Konstantinovka. And in Konstantinovka, of course, since now it is already a frontline city, fire damage is regularly inflicted. Warehouses are destroyed. In fact, Konstantinovka is gradually turning into ruins, Novomykhailovka, that is, into ruins. In these frames, we see with you some kind of small warehouse, which was discovered by the intelligence of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, which was immediately hit by an artillery strike, as a result of which there was a secondary detonation, a fire and multiple explosions. If we generally increase the update in Konstantinovka from the 1st of April, then we can imagine, and in general, we observe a fairly dense focus of the Russian army. According to Konstantinovka, of course, there is still a lot of work for the Russian army. This, well, it is smaller than Novomykhailovka, slightly smaller, perhaps in length, wider, perhaps wider than the villa areas. But in general, the fund is gradually shifting here. That is, the battle for Ugledar is really just around the corner. Perhaps the 5th final assault of this settlement, and after that the movement will begin further in the direction of Kurakov. At the same time, counter-battery fighting is regularly carried out in the direction. Drones are working. Artillery positions and mortar calculations are monitored, which are regularly attacked. In these frames, another up to 30 were apparently destroyed. Then we are moving with you to the Krasnogorsk direction. The situation here is very interesting. I would like to get more details, more information, but so far we have what we have. What happened here? Let me remind you that the other day the armed forces of the Russian Federation bombed and destroyed the Charles Dam, for the 2nd time in the last year. This was a blow, as a result of which the dam was damaged and destroyed. And after this destruction, of course, this blow could. As a result of this strike, the Russian command managed to achieve several goals. First of all, of course, this is a decrease in logistics capabilities, the ability to transfer reserves to Umanskoye, Telovo, Yasnobrodovka. Of course, the second task that has been completed is flooding of the region, the territory south of the Charles Reservoir. There are several materials available today. Here on these frames, we see with you a Ukrainian car trying to drive on the ground in some way. We see that this is not quite easy to do because the place is flooded. It's difficult because he even backs up. Perhaps some road beat completely for. Some route was flooded with water, and therefore there are attempts to somehow find another route. And there are also satellite images. We see with you that in general, the river in this case turns out to be what this river is called. I will not tell you. Maybe there is somehow. Yes, Vovcha. The Vovcha River overflowed just south of the Charles Reservoir, overflowed widely and flooded areas. And in general, if we put the flooding area on the map, then approximately the flooding area looks like this in some way. On the one hand, the sinking is insignificant, but most importantly, I understand that the Russian command tried to understand and achieve the following result. There are several supply roads leading to Krasnogorsk, the main arteries that allow the APU to still stay in Krasnogorsk quite Carpenter. At least one highway was sunk. How this affected logistics, I can't say, no one can say, there is very little information. But for sure it could have affected in some significant way at least for a while. This road is now blocked, and it is impossible to use it. There is only, in fact, one single possible supply route going, which is continuous and further to Krasnogorovka. That is, if this information is actually confirmed, if indeed with the help of flooding it was possible to cut off some route. Perhaps even two, because the second route is also downstream, then there is an extremely high probability in the near future we can expect the resumption of hostilities by the Russian army on the southern coverage of Krasnogorka. While there is the ability to advance, and while the APU is essentially cut off from supplies. Yes, that is, the main task is unlikely to be to take the entire Krasnogorovka straight there with one blow, but at least align the front line along the railway, perhaps finally along Geologichная Street, along Vachutin Street. And here is some such boundary may well be possible at the entrance as a result of flooding and, let's say, a short-term, blocking of a settlement. So far, no information has been received about these hostilities, so it's possible that nothing will happen. It's hard to say. But for sure the APU, including, will look for some solutions, some attempts to exit. But despite even the battle for Krasnogorovka, including, this situation will naturally directly affect the settlements of Neytelova and Pervomeyskaya. Let me remind you that the bridge in the area of the Bad River on Umanskaya was already destroyed by the Russian army a few days ago. There is still preserved or has been preserved, perhaps there is still a supply through this area. Here, in principle, there is a stable supply. The only drawback of this supply is that there is a very narrow isthmus, which is probably under the tight artillery control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. It is difficult to pass unnoticed there. And we see, among other things, in connection with the flooding, destruction of the Charles Dam. The supply of Nilov on the supports between it and Pervomeysky was violated. And here, for sure, this destroyed dam played probably the greatest, let's say, a negative role in this situation. And today it is interesting to note that after 3 or 4 days after the Russian team, the soldiers of the Russian army on the western outskirts of Pervomeysky set the flag. Only 4 days later, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation confirmed that during the fighting, assault operations, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to completely clean up and establish control above the locality of Pervomeyskaya. Here in general, the situation for the APU is developing as negatively as possible. As negative as possible. Perhaps you saw the other day how Zelensky came to some university and told students there's something about some difficult situation there. And it started there. There is one passage in this speech where he talks about the fact that some detachment, some fighters left their positions there and began to retreat, as a result of which a large group of high-altitude fighters found themselves there in some kind of environment. So today, the details began to arrive, and it seems to be reported that it was about the 25th Brigade, which, in principle, were transferred here from the Kopensky direction. It is not reported that it was they who retreated, or surrendered, or something like that. If we generally increase the number of updates in a few days, then there really were shots here, let's say. The capture of a large number of fighters with the 25th Brigade. That is, it's not some fairy tales of fiction. Indeed, there were cases of capture of soldiers of the 25th Brigade, some kind of sharp breakthrough of the Russian army. And now all this is appearing in this direction. So it is reported that the 25th Brigade, when they got into a very difficult situation in these fields between Thin, Umansky, Yasnobrodovka, Neytelova, requested evacuation or support for evacuation. Their principals were refused, and they said you should stand here to the death. They saw through something, counted, searched, and why should we? Well, we take and die for it is unclear why. When well, we are not to blame for anything. And it is reported that 200 people took left positions, surrendered. 200 fighters of the Ukrainian army from the 25th Brigade surrendered to the Russian army. They got up from the front line and crossed the pounds and went into captivity to the Russian fighters. Of course, the figure is very large. Then, as for some individual branches of the armed forces, it is a whole battalion, yes. But therefore we are not in a hurry to draw conclusions yet. Perhaps these are just exaggerated rumors, but in general, it seems more or less clear now that what is being discussed. And the Russian army continues its assault operations in the direction of Yasnobrodovka. Serious assaults are underway. Some sources report a visit to Umanskoye. In general, it seems to me that in the near future, the story will end here, and the Russian army will already go to Nedolev. Karlovka. Due to the fall of the same Pervomaysky, it is obvious that in the near future, this section will be leveled. Then everything is already entering the final stage of this operation. In fact, it has already reached the boundary of the battle for Seladov, since having reached the same Karlovka, Galitsivka. The desired first one is no longer a battle for these small villages, it is already the beginning of the battle for Seladov. The next largest stronghold, after which, let's say, the whole of Ukraine. Pokrovskaya is already, let's say, the whole of Ukraine. Yes, after Pokrovsk there are fields, 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 fields. And then the Dnieper? After Pokrovskaya, let's say, well, Pavlograd, okay. Well, the prince's application. Well, what am I leading up to? That the Russian army is approaching the final frontier and a more serious active operation will begin in the near future. And as we said, a Russian offensive in 4 directions is expected in the summer, and it will be very interesting to watch. Next, let's switch with you to the north direction. The fighting continues in Zabarduk. Over the past day, they have repeatedly tried, bypassing, say, the Bad River, to counterattack. To attack more precisely the Afu positions from the north. However, while the terrain is just beginning to be tested here, there are a lot of minefields, there are explosions, and, accordingly, it is still difficult to advance here. It has not yet been possible to reach this milestone, but in the near future, it is to reach this forest belt, after which the battle for Berdych will end as a whole. And after the capture of Berdych, the Russian Karen will be able, let's say, to shift its focus, and slowly work with support workers in the operational space in the direction of Novoselovka first, to Bakhmutovka, Solovyev and other settlements. In general, with the fall of Berdych, it is obvious that Semenovka, including no one, will hold it, will retreat. Very interesting information is being received today again by Kalinova, or rather continues to be received for many days. For the latest news that we are with you. In general, what we stopped at, what the cartographers stopped at there, let's say, is the advance of the Russian army along Stepova Street. While the concrete progress is not clear where it was possible, because either to catch on, or to completely knock it out from the whole street, perhaps it was possible to go further. It's hard to understand, but in general it's just reported that there is some kind of progress. The APU is transferring permanent reserves, trying to stabilize the situation, impose a battle in the lowlands, say, in a populated area, but so far it seems to be not quite successful. Of the interesting things, it is worth paying attention to the updates that were published today by the pro-Ukrainian deep state map. I think you know her but they are. I don't update the map according to them, like many cartographers, I try to wait. Let's say no, I don't adjust the line of control of one side or another, but I can adjust the gray zone according to their map, of course. And in general, I did it today. Here we have it, turns out it's a forest belt. Here at the intersection of the forest belt railway, there is an exit to the next railway. And according to the deep state, this area has now come under the full control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. That is all, this area is now under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. And here the most important thing is that we managed to take a network of strong points along the railroad and in this forest belt. This is a very serious strong point, and relying on which you can safely move on. And of course, first of all, what the armed forces of the Russian Federation are interested in is this, let's say, a village. This, let's say, a dacha village located between railways, and battles are already underway. Even if we take the distance from the advanced Russian positions on the new frontiers and the first building of this village itself, Then the distance is 300 meters, that is, also a shooting battle. And if we turn to the latest satellite images from this area, then we will see. I hope the quality of the picture, and I hope from the screen resolution, allows you to view the area and recognize the same forest belts and the railway that are familiar there. Then pay attention to this yellow-orange spot black. This is fire. This is a fiery anomaly recorded by satellites. And if you and I return to this area, then here, let's put some red color on it. Here is where the greatest activity of the fiery anomaly is present. In other words, we understand that these positions are being worked out as much as possible by the sun. Most likely and possibly, perhaps, extremely possibly, there is an extremely high probability that tomorrow Russian troops will catch on to this dacha village and assault actions, battles will begin here. If this happens, then it's not just an offensive, it's not just another breakthrough there, it's a catastrophe. It's the beginning of hostilities for the next one. And we see with you, in fact, based on these two pictures, there is such a global, big, say two wedges, which goes one along the Karlovka, and the second goes along the piece of iron through the queue, and all two wedges naturally close on Pokrovsky. That's the kind of story that's developing here. We will see how it all ends, but so far everything is going extremely against the armed forces of Ukraine. Then we are moving with you to the Bakhmut-Artemovsky direction. A powerful counter-battery struggle is being waged on the southern flank. Simply everything that can be destroyed is destroyed. A huge number of artillery installations in the area of Stupochki, Protekno, in the area of Delivka, in the area of Alexander Shultin. Dozens of artillery installations, dozens of crabs up to the 30th Paladins, and so on and other nonsense, is destroyed here just every day and so far. But in general, this primarily suggests that the FU had to pull up artillery and try to somehow slow down the Russian offensive. And it turns out that for artillery installations, most often, it is a one-way ticket. Perhaps they do not have time to shoot something there, but not for long, and in the next few days, a day, perhaps hours. One or another artillery installation approaching the front line is destroyed immediately by return fire. That's just when some Savushka arrived at the position and did not even have time to stand for a fire strike, as she was immediately destroyed with the use of either a lancet or something else. If we talk about the situation on the ground, then it is worth noting the beginning of the assault actions of the Russian army north of Kleshivka, in the direction of a network of strong points located northwest of the settlement. Here is the first strong point, here is the second strong point, here is the third strong point. A small network like this, but also, let's say, such an unpleasant pain, we can even call it that. And here are published footage of another assault, attempts to shoot fire, knock out several pieces of equipment of the Russian army. It's hard to say exactly where we managed to reach. This is where, let's say, the last damaged piece of equipment was geolocated. That is, it is approaching, and if we somehow extrapolate the movement, then the direction of impact was like this. There is no exact information yet on how far it was possible to reach. Assault operations and advances from both the north and the south continue in the most populated locality of Chaz Yar. Russian Su-25th attack aircraft are simply working non-stop. The maximum professionalism is. Well, this is the only direction where such a number of Su-25's frames are published just every day, new flights. Fly in several pairs, fly in several approaches, strike at heights in the area of Bogdanovka, in the area of Kalinov. 70 Yar hours, after working out, flies safely and calmly back. Here are some more shots of the Su-25s. Here it will be better for us to see exactly where the blows are being struck. Here is a flight, they fly over to storm, they carry blows, and now they strike at farms. Here is Bogdanovka, on the lowland, there is a hill, through which the hunters escaped to the hill. And here are the positions themselves, which are being applied on farms, which are being hit. And in general, yes, why do I say that you ran away with? Because today, we have published several posts about the Ukrainian All report. First, there was a message from a source on Earth that everyone in USU had finally retreated. There were several counteroffensive attempts, all failed. And after that, the pro-Ukrainian deep state updated the map, showing and painting Bogdanovka completely in the color of the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Again, we are keeping the whole story for now, of course, because we need to wait for some geolocation, confirmation frames. Perhaps they have retreated, and the cleanup has not yet been carried out to the end. But in any case, if they really retreated, then in the near future, there will certainly be information confirming this. And also marked. The advance of the Russian army south of the Golubkov Stupa to the German forest is noted. Again, a pro-Ukrainian resource publishes an update of the map. In other words, if we go back to the map, approximately at the moment, such control is observed by the armed forces of the Russian Federation without geolocation, without video confirmation by both pro-Ukrainian, pro-Russian, and neutral sources. This story is now under the control of the Russian Federation. Of course, the essential difference is unambiguous, but that's what it is, that is. From the interesting, of course, it is immediately worth calculating the distance. There is less than a kilometer left to the canal itself, to the advanced Russian positions. In the area of 750 meters. It's really about nothing. And of course the Russian army will continue to move. And the main task is obvious. It is to finally enter this channel, take positions here, take supports here. Establish complete control like this, and thus bypass the eastern part of the Yar clock. The new quarter is new, with the south. To take a semicircle already specifically from the railway 36th kilometer. Yes, the Seversky Donbass is a channel, and among other things, there is news that Russian troops have advanced further inland, in the direction of Kalinov. It's hard to say exactly where the promotion is, but it's probably already as close as possible. And apparently, judging by all this news, it is unlikely that we will even see fighting with you in this channel, in this eastern quarter. The APU will simply retreat. They will either retreat, or the story that happened with the 25th Brigade will repeat itself. When those who remain in this part request evacuation, they will say, well, sort it out for yourself. They'll just give up. Why can this happen? Because we just watched the video the other day. Let's take another look. Here is another attempt to either come or leave by car through the only pontoon. Perhaps there is some kind of crossing in this area. But this was not destined to happen. The terrain is under full or either fire, or either agriculture has already worked here, or some other means. And therefore, it is simply possible that it is impossible to retreat, even now. It's just that while those who are in this part do not understand this, they are waiting for some kind of rotation according to the timings. Which is possible. When they come, they will ask, let's change us, and they will be told everything, alas, alas, we cannot. And then perhaps the only right decision will be made. Then we are moving with you to the Seversk direction. There is also a lot of information coming in here. We will start with you from the Vyemsky direction. Here, individual cartographers, neutral cartographers, and, let's say, pro-Russian cartographers, note that during the fighting, during the assault measures, it was possible to establish control over this hill. It's a hill. Of course, it's invisible on the map, it's a hill. And this network, a sufficiently developed, extensive network of strong points, trenches and trenches. In other words, this is already a serious advance, and taking control of the first serious supporters. Relying and basing on which it is possible to continue offensive actions both in the direction of the excavation itself, as well as in the direction of Ivan Darivka itself, and also strike at the rear and, say, groups in the USU. In the settlement of disputed Bologorovka, the armed forces of the Russian Federation, continuing the assault actions of Verkhnykamiansky, did not receive any more news on this support, but today, for the first time again in many years, months, footage of FAB strikes on the positions of the AFU in the village of Verkhnykamianskaya began to be published. Quite rare shots, this has not been published before. Previously, the FABs did not come here at all, because then, when the fighting for the settlement was conducted in 2022 year, this type of weapon has not been used so widely and massively. It has already flew. It could be related to anything. It begins to prevent the transfer, ending with the fact that the artillery preparation begins, perhaps already for the assault of the settlement itself. Bologorovka is still unchanged and blows are being struck as on the dump, as on the forest belts around. Everything is still, again, nothing has been radically changed here, broken through, overcome, everything, but as it was, it remained. The South Kapinski direction of the Afu snarls, but artillery strikes, perhaps gradually, are probing the defense of the Russian Federation a little bit. Surely this is one of the most lively directions on the part of the Apu. There are two solutions here, either to transfer reserves somewhere to Avdiivka from here, as they did with the 25th Brigade. But this did not help, half of the battalion surrendered, or to organize an urgent counteroffensive here, in order to slow down the advance of the Russian army. That is, one of two things. And based on that, and knowing the temperament of the Ukrainian command in general, it will certainly be decided to counterattack, and not to transfer reserves. For a number of reasons, including that the local is familiar, and secondly, that, as if it were possible, it can bring some dividends to its Western partners. Strikes continue to be carried out in the Kharkiv direction. Air bomb attacks on the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces as individuals, and Cossack Lopen in Ovchansk. All this is under heavy fire, under tight control. The next FABs, powerful enough, arrive in a locality, another warehouse, or a place of temporary dislocation is destroyed. Everything is being prepared for an offensive operation. Today there were very interesting shots published from Western Ukraine. Here is a locality. We discussed with you that the last few days there have been strikes on power plants. Today they published a blow of striking at the Dobrotovskaya power plant in Western Ukraine. Dobrotovskaya thermal power plant. These frames do not directly show what exactly was removed from this thermal power plant, but also according to geolocations. According to the video, to the place where this particular power plant is located. But again, this is indirect confirmation, of course, although there is a pipe here, this pipe from the tower. That is, well, there is an extremely high probability that they got where they needed to, including in Western Ukraine. And the thermal power plant in the Kiev region is not the only thermal power plant that was destroyed during, say, a missile raid that took place this month. And in Kiev, what we have of interesting things in Kiev. Germany has promised to give another Patriot system. After all, they have been beaten out, they will get it. It is difficult to understand whether it will help in this situation or not. In general, what exactly is this Patriot system going to defend, and so on and so forth. But, of course, the most interesting thing is that Western sources report that an offensive will be conducted in 4 directions. This will be the Donetsk, Kherson-Lugansk, Zaporozhye direction, and in addition to a possible offensive on Kharkov. Well, it certainly can be something with something. Of course, we will observe all of this. Zelensky has a deadline, until the 21st of May. This is when he ends his legitimacy, his presidential powers, that is, in fact, the moment when it still makes sense to negotiate with him. And this is the period, the deadline, when this person is still able to decide something with his signature. It will be absolutely legitimate, absolutely have legal force. No one will be able to challenge it, cancel it, or something like that. This is the signature of the officially legitimate president. After the 21st of May, not a single document signed by him may, in theory, be accepted and not recognized by all subsequent leaders of Ukraine. And not only by our Western partners and so on. There, even if he decides to even surrender on May 22nd, and even if Russia recognizes and says in the West, and it's like he's not the president, he is. That is, even here there is such a trap, that it is not only Russia that is not recognized. Yes, in principle, even the West may not recognize any capitulation of the country. Ukraine will say, well, he's not the president, he's generally the same usurper as there, and if they call him something and say, then in fact someone else is the president there, yes, or something else like that. Or they themselves will spend money wherever they want, there will be elections, and appoint whoever they want. That is, the deadline is the 21st of May. And when, of course, no agreements will be reached by this date, it's possible that at that moment, let's say, the battle will begin to the last, since there is no one to talk to, and it's still necessary to end the war. And even if they want to stop, then. And how will you stop until you get a signature? Right. That is, well, this signature, it turns out, plays a crucial role at the moment in this part of the conflict. And that's it, dear friends.